Folks, this is Attitude 2, Tim McKillican for OutstandingPoker.com, Charles on Full Tilt. I've loaded up a table here, $50 no limit, otherwise known as 25 cent, 50 cent no limit Texas Hold'em. I'm going to go through a video here going through a wide variety of concepts that are important to becoming a winning poker player. I've gone through a lot, I've hammered home a lot of pre-flop concepts in previous videos. I want to sort of reinforce them a little bit in this video, as well as getting into some of the concepts that we've been covering in some of my later videos about post-flop play, hand reading, appropriately putting your opponents on certain hand ranges on the post-flop, and accurately judging, well, how does my hand stack up against my opponent's hand range, and how should I optimally respond to my opponent's moves. So I'm going to get into a wide variety of topics here. So I've loaded up 50 cent, or 25 cent, 50 cent, and I really want to hammer home a lot of the pre-flop concepts, the really important stuff that I think if you've been watching a lot of videos you should know, but I just want to reinforce some of them and really get into some of the basically the whys behind why we make certain moves, and just not so that you're just repeating what I'm doing here, but more so understanding why, so that you can apply the concepts in maybe if a little trickier situation comes up or something a little different, you know why you're doing certain things, as opposed to just, well, Charles or Tim does it, so we're going to do it ourselves. So here, if you notice, I've opened up 4-3 offsuit on the button. Now, this is a hand I would never play if I'm sitting in pretty much any other spot except the button when it's unopened to me. I think it's profitable to be opening up any hand on the button, or pretty much any hand on the button, as long as you're smart about playing it in position. So I open it up, I flop middle pair, and the guy leads into me on a pretty blank flop. I'm going to go ahead and call here. I'm not really sure why he's leading into me. There's no draws, so unless this guy's just sitting on like a 9-8 type hand, or he could just be sitting in leading into me with absolutely nothing. People tend to do that a lot. So I do have some showdown value here. I'm not gonna. That 9 is definitely a scare card for him if he's sitting on like a 9-8 type hand, which I could conceivably see him doing, leading into me with that. So I'm just gonna check behind here and try to get to showdown here. I do have some showdown value. This is a concept called pot control, where if you do have showdown value, you don't necessarily want to bloat the pot with a marginal hand. Now, here is exactly the case where I have a marginal hand that does have showdown value against my opponent. So I don't necessarily need to make a big bet on the turn there and try to bluff him out, because what's going to happen is if I make a bet there on the turn, he's either going to call me if he has me beat, or he's gonna fold if he's behind me already. So the bet doesn't really accomplish much. And now that he's let out here for about 2/3 of the pot on the river, that 9 seemingly could have helped his hand. I'm not going to mess around. Now, he could conceivably had like an ace 7 type hand, or even like a ace queen type hand, and have bluffed me out there. But given that I don't have a read on my opponent yet, I'm going to play it a little safe there and just take the pot down there, or fold there and just let him have the pot. So until I get a better read, I'm not gonna get too crazy. But coming back to what I was talking about pre-flop, I think it is definitely, if you're playing profitably and playing, I guess I should say wisely, you could probably make a profit playing almost any 2 cards on the button. This comes back to positional play. I know I've stressed it so much in previous videos, and I can't stress enough, if you're a newer member of the site, watch some of the earlier videos where I really get into pre-flop concepts. But to really sort of reinforce some of these things, I wanted to talk about it again today. So in terms of positional play, it's almost your position at the table is almost more important than the two cards that you hold in your hand. And when I say positional play, I mean, well, who's acting first, who's acting last on each hand. So if you're in the blinds, or if you're under the gun, meaning you're directly to the left of the big blind, you're going to be acting first or early on each subsequent post-flop street. So whether it be the flop, the turn, or the river, and that basically puts you at a tremendous disadvantage because your opponent who does have position on you, meaning they get to act last on each post-flop street, just has a tremendous advantage because they get to determine what to do after you've acted each street. So they can either play for pot control like I did on that first hand that I went in with 4-3 offsuit, or they can maybe sense that you're playing pretty weak and might be able to steal a pot with a marginal hand and bluff you out of the pot when perhaps you even have the best hand. So the position your position at the table just is such a tremendous advantage. Being in position compared to being out of position, that I can't stress enough that you should really, really the I guess the consequence of being in position or out of position is justifies what hands you're actually going to get involved with in a pot. So if I'm under the gun here, like I just was in that hand, I'm folding like a very very wide range of hands, starting hands that I could possibly have, and you'll see me even routinely fold hands like even like King Jack offsuit or even like King Queen offsuit. I'll fold under the gun because I just don't think it's going to be profitable. Especially at these stakes where guys are just calling all over the place and you're just really going to have a hard time trying to figure out where you're at in the hand. In a hand like King Jack offsuit, yeah, it may look pretty because yeah, it's two Broadway cards that can connect with a lot of flops, but the problem is that the hands that your opponents are going to call a raise with um, are oftentimes going to dominate hands like King Jack offsuit because they're going to be calling with hands like Ace Jack. They're going to call in with hands like King Queen, with Ace King, with Ace Jack, as well as like Queens, Kings, Aces, Jack, like pocket Kings, Queens, Aces, Jacks. That it's just a lot of the times you're going to have what we call a lot of reverse implied odds where even if you connect and hit like top pair on the flop, you still stand to maybe not have the best hand. I'm going to go ahead and raise this limper here. You still stand not to have the best hand a lot of the time because they're calling with hands that dominate you pre-flop. So it's going to be really hard for you to outflop them, and that's even if you do actually connect with the flop because say you miss it, you're going to be out of position now. I'm going to go ahead and fold here. I don't have a read on Pumori. So I'm going to go ahead and fold here. So coming back to that, even if when you do hit a flop or the flop arrives and you miss it, which is going to happen like 2/3 of the time, it's going to be tough for you to take it down even because you're out of position now. And yeah, you can continuation bet, but it's just if your opponent calls you, maybe he's loose or maybe you don't have a read on him. You're just going to really have no idea where you're at and have to end up just folding the hand after you've put in your pre-flop raise as well as your continuation bet, and it's just going to get messy. Or you potentially put in a lot of money with what you think is the best hand, and your opponent has you dominated because they've outkicked you, your King Jack type hand, or you just don't connect with the flop. So that's why I just don't think it's going to be profitable for you to raise those hands being out of position. Now, when you're in position, like I think you can raise a very wide range of hands, like 4-3 offsuit, that sort of thing, just because your positional advantage will allow you to make up for the fact that you have a much weaker starting hand. So here in this hand, I chose to flat call this guy's min raise because I don't really want to start building the pot massively with pocket nines, and I do have M on the button, so I don't mind seeing a flop and then jacking the flop up if I do like the flop, or potentially stealing it if I sense that everyone's weak. Not that with pocket nines, it's not really a hand that you really need to steal because either if everyone's weak, you generally might have or likely have the best hand, or if people are playing strongly, it's with overcards on the flop, there's a high chance that you don't have a strong hand. So here's an interesting spot where I've picked up King Jack offsuit. And people kind of get into a lot of trouble. This is where a lot of newer players they'll simply call. They'll be like, well, it's not strong enough to fold, but it's not weak enough to fold, but it's not strong enough to raise, so I'm just going to call. But I think calling is actually probably the worst play in this spot here, and I can't stress that enough, and I want to explain why, and I really want you guys to really like think about why I'm saying, well, calling is the worst play here. And the reason being, and I kind of alluded to it when I'm talking about playing like King Jack offsuit out of position, is that if you're calling his raise, a lot of the times what he's raising with are hands that you dominate, like Ace Jack or Ace King or Pocket Queens or even like King Queen type hands. And if you're calling, what you're doing when you call is you really narrow your hand range, your perceived hand range to your opponents, because they know that if you actually had a good hand, you'd probably be raising, and if you actually had a terrible hand, you'd probably be folding. So they know exactly that you're sitting on like a hand like King Jack offsuit, or a hand like pocket eights, or all those like marginal hands that people just love to call with. And the problem being is that they don't really take initiative and the aggressive stance in the pot. So you really, if you're just simply calling, you limit the range of hands that you can really represent post flop. So the reason I like either folding, which I did there, or if the guy's really loose, I don't mind a three bet either, because you take control of the hand. You widen your range of hands actually or at least the strength of your range, because then you continue to rep. Well, he's going to be guessing. Well, is this guy sitting on like a premium pocket pair, or that sort of hand? And I'm going to go ahead. I have a strong hand here. This guy seems to be splashed around a bit. I'm going to go ahead and raise him up to $4 here with Ace 10 offsuit. I am in the blinds. I am out of position, but I think my hand strength warrants raising him up. Same reason I raised King Queen offsuit. The previous hand. I like to punish limpers, and people generally are limping with their weak hands. So if I have deduced that my hand range is ahead of my opponent's range, I'm going to raise it up, and I'm going to be happy just to take the pot down pre-flop, or I can continue to represent a strong hand post-flop by raising pre-flop, because I can sit there and represent that I have like a pocket aces type hand, or just a really strong hand. So depending on the texture of the flop, I can do a lot of different things if I raise pre-flop. Whereas if I'm just limping or calling pre-flop, it really limits the type of hands that I can have, because my opponents are going to know, well, this guy's likely just sitting on like a suited connector, or like a medium to low pocket pair, or that sort of hand. So by raising pre-flop, it really allows me to expand the strength of my range, and allows me to take down a lot more pots post-flop, because it's going to keep my opponents really guessing what type of hands I could have. So it comes down to there's a lot of things about sort of um, intermediate pre-flop play that I really need to expand, or am interested in expanding on for you guys. One, positional play, how important it is, and how you really want to narrow your hand ranges when you're under the gun or in the blinds, and expand your hand ranges when you're in position, because you can really represent or leverage your positional advantage to take down a lot more pots. Secondly, the next thing I really want to stress about pre-flop play when you're starting out is why we want to raise when we're entering pots, and why limping is just pretty much a terrible play in any case when you're playing like six max no limit hold'em. Like the reason why we don't want to limp is because by limping, it's similar to the King Jack offsuit, where I chose to either raise or fold to a raiser. By limping, we narrow the range of hands that we can credibly represent to our opponents. So if we're limping, they can instantly start to narrow down the type of hand ranges that we have, and really exploit our play, because they know that, yeah, we're not often going to be limping with our strong hands, and they know that we're going to be folding our weak hands, so they instantly can narrow down that type of hand range that we're playing. And really get to know, well, or deduce what kind of hands hit that flop, and then based on the flop texture, if they have position on you, and they've shown aggression by raising, they can really hammer the pot down. And unless the flop texture really hits a limping range, for example, if the flop comes down like 9-8-7 with two spades, yeah, that crushes a limping range, but a lot of times the flop will come down like a king seven deuce offsuit type hand, and it doesn't hit a limper like almost whatsoever. So anyone who's raising pre-flop can take it down with almost their entire range of hands, because it very, very rarely hits a limping range. So we really want to be raising when we're coming into pots, because then we can credibly represent having a strong hand, as well as having a marginal hand. If your opponent starts to get a read on you that you're coming into a lot of pots, they're not going to know whether you actually have a strong hand or have a weak hand, and you can continue to credibly represent strong hands as well, because you haven't done anything out of the ordinary to make them suspect that. To be able to narrow down your hand range and take out the top part of your range, such as like premium pocket pairs. Now I often get the argument, well, What about limping preflop with like my strong hands to make up for limping with weaker hands? And then I definitely argue against that, especially at lower stakes, because with your premium hands, you really want to start building the pot. Even pre-flop, because you only have so many opportunities to really get the money in. And if I have a really strong hand, I want to start building the pot as soon as I can, because it exponentially, the pot size exponentially increases with the number of streets that you can raise the pot. So if I miss out on a street like pre-flop, raising the pot, then it limits the size of the pot that I can make, or how large I can grow the pot pre-flop or post-flop, and where I really want to get the money in. And if I'm making like a close to a pot-sized bet on every street, if I'm missing out on all the possible streets of betting, I can't get all the money in and really get maximum value for my strong hands. Now that's one important reason why you want to be raising for pre-flop. Now, second, people are like, well, I want to be tricky. I want to mess up my opponents. They'll incorrectly identify my hand range. Well, I'd argue that by if you're going to be limping because you don't want to drive your opponents out of the pot and you want to be tricky, I'd argue, well, if they're folding all the time and you don't want to drive them out, you should be raising your more marginal hands more often, as opposed to playing your stronger hands a lot more slowly. Because if you're raising your marginal hands, that reduces the likelihood in their eyes that you actually have a strong hand when you do. So they're going to start to pay you off a lot more lightly when you do have a strong hand, because they're not going to be able to accurately identify your hand range. So, and then the benefit of that being that when you do have strong hands, you get to decide post flop, if you're being the aggressor, when to really build that pot, or when to keep the pot small, play for pot control, if you have a marginal hand that you wouldn't mind getting to showdown. So that's pretty much the primary reason why we really want to keep the pot, or be the aggressor, and really build the pot when you have strong hands, and be the aggressor and come in raising when you're coming in. Now, here's an interesting spot. I raise with a pretty strong hand post flop. I'm going to go ahead and call here, because this guy, he's already 3-bet me before, and I think he's just kind of monkeying around a little bit. So. And don't get me wrong, I'm not simply just calling here with the hopes of hitting a flop and folding. There's a lot of flops that I'd make a move at, because I think this guy's hand range is not simply just 3-betting with like his marginally made hands, like with his strong hands. I think he could be doing this with a wide range. So if the flop comes favorable where I can credibly represent a bluff as well, I'm going to do that. So I have hit a strong hand here. I don't mind getting in here. I think that my pair jacks with top kicker here is definitely well ahead of his range. My check raise could look pretty bluffy. And if he does push me all in here, and I'm definitely going to be calling, and I do lose, like, I'll just chalk it up to I happen to end up hitting the top part of his range. But I've already determined before that he's been splashing around, like, he's already 3-bet me before. Like, I don't think, because of that fact, I don't think he's just doing that with his premium hand. So I don't mind calling a raise there with ace jack, and then playing some poker post flop. It is going to be tough in those kind of situations because you're out of position, but I think that's why you need to have like a reasonably strong hand that connects well with flops, as well as the fact that you have to be willing to steal some favorable flops to you. Now, favorable flops that I would steal are even flops like that, where it's just they have a really hard time connecting with any sort of hand, like that Jack Deuce Deuce hand. Unless he's actually sitting on like an overpair, he's not going to be happy with his hand. Now, I happen to actually flop well, or connect well with that flop. But I think a lot of the times he's sitting there 3-betting me. He's seen it, and however he's learned how to play. He's like, well, 3-betting a lot is good, because it is good, but you have to really be aware of, well, how are your opponents going to respond to those 3-bets. So I'm not just going to let him 3-bet me. And when I say 3-bet, for those who don't know, meaning that if I make a raise and then he makes a re-raise, it's what we call a 3-bet. If he's going to just be 3-betting me relentlessly, I'm not going to have to take a stand at some point. But at the same time, you really want to be patient. And if I didn't have a very strong hand there, I would have just folded and waited for a better opportunity. But I think a hand like Ace Jack does connect well with a lot of flops, and I think it's ahead of his three betting range. So I don't mind seeing a flop there, and I am prepared to bluff raise some flops where I think it's not likely that he hit it, and I can credibly represent a strong hand. Now, the reason you could ask, well, maybe the better play on that flop there would be to check call and try to induce some more action. The reason I didn't decide to check call there was because I think that at these stakes and these types of players, they're not going to give you more action on bluffs in a three bet pot with like as a complete bluff, unless he's a complete maniac, which I don't have any evidence at this point to support that he's a complete maniac. But if he's a standard player that's playing aggressive and playing a tight aggressive game that's three betting a lot, um, those are the types of players that they'll make their three bet, they'll make their continuation bet with most of their range that they three bet with, but then they're going to shut down if they don't have a hand. And a hand like Ace Jack there, it's vulnerable to a lot of the hands that are in his three betting hand range, such as like a King Queen type hand, a King 10 type hand, um, like just a wide range of hands that could potentially improve on the turn or the river. And then like if a Queen or King comes on the turn or river, it's going to put me in a really tough spot because number one, I'm going to be out of position, and number two, I'm not going to know whether that or how that hit his hand or how well it did or not. So I stand to lose a lot of money if I want to get to showdown. He continues to hammer the pot, and also my sort of my read at this point with this type of player is that he's not going to really put in a lot more money on the turn or river unless he really connects with the flop, or if he's just a crazy maniac, which I don't have any evidence to support that read yet. So I think the check raising the flop is the best play because I'm gonna, if he's sitting on like a Queen Jack type hand, he's gonna have a tough time folding, and I'm gonna get or like a Jack 10, and I'm gonna end up getting my stacking good, as well as I don't risk him drawing out on me on the turn or river. There are merits as well to check calling if you're playing an opponent that will put more money in with a weaker hand on the turn, or if I had a stronger hand, like say if I had like I don't know, an Ace King type hand, and there aren't as many scare cards on the turn or river, because I like say I flop a pair of aces there. Check calling might say, in fact, same hand, I had Ace Jack, but instead of flopping flop being Jack Deuce Deuce, it was Ace Deuce Deuce. I think that probably the best play there would be to check call because I'm not as concerned about an overcard coming, as well as the fact that his range is more made up of other aces. So number one, I have a decent kicker with Ace Jack, but at the same time, he could have me outkicked with a better kicker of a Jack, and then two, he could continue to bluff the Ace, in which case I'll get more value out of him, and three, he could have a weaker kicker and potentially think his hand's good if I'm playing my hand a little weaker by just check calling the flop. So I don't mind check calling if it was like an Ace Deuce Deuce type hand. So here I've gone up against him again. He decided to call me. This hand hits a ton. This flop hits a ton of his calling range. I flopped a gut shot here. I don't mind continuing to firing out a continuation bet here. And I'm going to go ahead and fire a double barrel here. I think that 9 is a good card for me because if he's sitting on a hand like and it's an okay card to maybe even triple barrel here. If he's sitting if he's sitting on the hand like 6-7 or like, and I'm gonna go ahead. I think it's gonna be profitable for me to go ahead and fire another barrel here, unless he's sitting on like a pair of kings. I don't expect him to fold a king here, but I think there's just too often that he's sitting on like a 7-8, like a Jack 10 type hand, with a gut shot. There's so many draws or any two spades, they all missed. And by me raising pre-flop, firing all three streets, I'm representing like a massively strong hand. So unless he thinks I'm crazy, which he doesn't really have reason to believe yet at this point, because I haven't done anything out of line. I think my three barrels gonna be profitable there. And don't get me wrong, some of the time I expect him to call, but like from a pure mathematical point of view, that bet there, I think I bet 14 into $16. It only has to work about 45% of the time for it to be a profitable bet. So like as long as he's folding 45% of the time, it's going to be a profitable bet and one that you should be making. But let's also not get carried away here by just thinking that you can just pound every pot you're in and expect to win it, because it's definitely not the case. The reason I thought that three barrel there was profitable, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think my image at this point at the table is credible enough for me to be able to fire three streets and be credible that I actually have a strong hand. If I had been getting a line, or even if I hadn't been getting a line, maybe I'd just been getting smacked with the deck earlier, but I hadn't been going to a lot of showdowns, and my opponents might perceive me to be getting out of line, and that's an important thing to think about, is your perceived image versus what is actually happening. Um, if I had been perceived to be getting out of line previously, I might not have made that triple barrel bluff. But at the same time, the other important factor to consider is how that board and how the continued turn and river action hits your opponent's hand range. Now, if he actually had a strong hand, he'd likely be raising either the flop or the turn there, because the board's very drawy. And meaning, when I say draw, I mean there's a ton of draws like gut shots, or there's a flush draw out there like 7-8 had an open end straight draw. Queen Jack had a gut shot. Jack 10 had a gut shot. Any like Ace 9 of spades, or like Ace King of spades or whatever. Um, had like a combo draw of like spades plus a pair, that like isn't going anywhere on that, and you want to get your money in if you actually have, like, say, a really strong hand like a set, or like two pair or whatever. So I think, number one, I think what I was given reason to believe that he didn't really like his hand, because he would have been raising either the flop or the turn, if he really liked it, because he didn't want he doesn't know, maybe I'm drawing, he doesn't want to allow me to suck out. Number two, there's a lot of draws that are in his range, that are hands in his range that are drawing hands that are gonna call the flop, gonna call the turn, but then fold to a big river bet, such as 7-8, or like even like your um, like I don't know, 7-6 types hands that have hit bottom pair, don't really believe you on the turn, but then if you fire another river bet, they're going to give you credit for having a strong hand. I don't expect a king, like he could conceivably also fold a king there if he's sitting on like a king, I don't know, let's say king 10 type hand. Like, it's pretty much only a bluff catcher. I'm not really going to be betting like a king jack type hand there for value too often. So if he has king 10, it's really only a bluff catcher. He really only can call there if he thinks I'm bluffing. So he could conceivably just fold that, a king, like a weak king type hand, as well. So um, I think I've gone over a bunch of reasons why I think that the triple barrel there, bluff there, was going to be profitable. As well as, you have to look at, well, what's your equity in the hand? I also had a gut shot, so if a 10 did come there on the turn of the river, my hand does improve quite substantially. And as well, the other thing to consider is, if you can start to represent other cards that come on the turn of the river. So um, because the turn of the river came non-threatening cards to a drawing hand, like they didn't really complete any draws. What I would have been concerned about were if a 5 came, completing 7-8. If a 10 came, although that would have a 10 would have improved my hand to a straight. If a 10 came, it also could have improved a 7-8 to a straight as well. Or if another spade came, it would have actually made for an interesting dynamic, because either I'd have to think about, well, can I credibly represent that I'm sitting on a flush draw and represent the flush? Or at the same time, I have to be concerned about, well, is this guy sitting on flush as well? And the way he played it, where he's playing quite passively, he very conceivably could have been sitting on a flush draw as well. So I'm not sure. I would have triple barreled a spade river, because he could potentially have had it himself. But definitely something to think about, and some of the things you should be thinking about when deciding, well, is this a good card to fire a second barrel? Is this a good card to fire a third barrel on the river? And don't get me wrong, I'm very rarely firing three barrels, and I can't stress enough, don't get carried away, especially at these stakes where people very rarely fold. But it's definitely an interesting hand, and a good hand to really evaluate. Well, all the things you really want to be thinking about when determining whether to try to bluff your opponent, and really determine, well, is this going to be a profitable bluff? And you notice right when I made the bet, I was saying, well, I do expect him to call a certain percentage of the time, and I don't expect him to be folding a king. So I'm not just sitting there trying to hammer it home and just force him to fold. You really have to think about, well, what types of hands does your opponent have that will call the flop bet, call the turn bet, but then fold the river bet. You have to conceivably put him on a wide enough range of hands that will fold to that third bet. And because there are so many draws that miss out there, I think that like weak, like one pair hands, or maybe sitting on like pocket tens or pocket jacks, those types of hands will fold to three bets. So if you're going to make bluffs, you really have to start thinking about, well, what types of hands are my opponents going to fold, and did they credibly get to that point with those hands? Um, so here's another interesting spot. We get two limpers. I've explained a ton in my previous videos that I love to punish limpers because it's such a weak play, and oftentimes I can just take the pot down pre-flop there, or even if they do, like, what dreams are made of is when they call with their like shitty hand, like 8-7 suited or something, just trying to hit a flop with that, and really getting incorrect odds to call another $3 with their suited connector or that sort of thing. I'm happy to build the pot when they call with those types of hands, and at the same time I'm happy to take down all the blinds pre-flop too. So it works out to my advantage a lot of the time. Definitely a profitable move there. So a hand like Queen Jack offsuit, I think this is where I'd start to raise this. If unopened to me, I'd raise this definitely in the cutoff. I think it's a fold if I was in middle position where this guy's seated right now. Now, how to respond to his min raise here? I think I'm just going to go ahead and fold. I've touched on this in other videos, but I don't think I'm going to have a lot of credibility to make strong plays right now and expect people to fold. I think I've been splashed around quite a bit of late, and I just don't think that they're going to give me a lot of credit. So because of that, how I'm going to adjust is I'm going to start to tighten up my range and really have stronger hands that have a higher likelihood of flopping well, so that if I do when I do hit flops, I have a higher likelihood of connecting with the flops, and when people play back at me, I'm going to have a better chance of being able stay in the pot and hopefully not have to give it up. Basically connect well with the flop so that I have a strong hand and can respond strongly to their if they play back at me. So the next thing I want to talk about in pre-flop play, I think the third concept is what bet sizing when you're raising pre-flop. Now, generally at lower stakes like this, I would definitely recommend raising four times the big. If you're opening the pot, meaning no one has limped or raised or anything yet, and the action's on you, I would raise at least four times the big blind. Plus, if people have already limped, I'd raise another big blind per limper. So, say you're on the button and you have one limper and it's on you, and you have a decent hand that you want to raise. I'd be raising five times the big blind. So at these stakes, I'd be raising up to 250. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to give my opponent incorrect odds to call. With their weaker hands that they're limping with. So I don't want to give them a cheap chance at calling with their suited connector and flopping strongly against my like pocket aces, and then stacking me because I really have no idea what kind of hand they have. Because if I'm only raising marginally, like say they limp and then I raise to $1.50, and I'm giving them odds to call one more dollar to see a flop. A lot of times they'll have odds to call with their marginal hands, such as like suited connectors. And if you're sitting on an overpair like pocket aces, pocket kings, it's going to be tough for you to really start to narrow down the range because they're going to be calling with almost every hand that they limped with. So the reason we want to raise larger is one, to really charge your opponents, give them incorrect odds to call with their weaker hands, and two, to really start to be able to narrow down their hand ranges post flop, so that I know that if they're calling a big raise pre-flop, I know that they're not just sitting there with 5-3 offsuit. It's very unlikely that they're sitting there with 5-3 offsuit, because it's just anyone who has half a brain is going to know that it's just not going to be profitable to limp and call with 5-3 offsuit out of position. So combined with my read of my opponents, with how often they are getting involved in pots, I can start to narrow down their hand range and really accurately determine, well, how do different flops hit their hand range. So if the flop comes king 7 deuce, I know that a guy that limp called a big raise pre-flop likely did not hit that flop unless he's sitting on like an ace king or king queen type hand, which you'll potentially see people limp calling with those type of hands, even though it's still going to be unprofitable to be calling pre-flop, limping and then calling out of position with like a king queen offsuit type hand. So I can't stress enough that just never be limping. And when you're coming in the pots, you want to be raising, and you want to be raising large amounts so that you're charging your opponents, and making them make mistakes by calling big bets with their suited connectors. And I often get the complaint, well, I don't want to drive. I have pocket aces now. I don't want to drive people out of the pot, so I'm only going to raise maybe 3 times a big blind up for limper and try to jack it up. Well, what's going to happen then is you're going to get the big blind to call. You're gonna get the guy who limped to call, and then they're both gonna have like just 2 completely random hands. One might have like anything from like a mid pocket pair to a suited connector to like a king jack type hand. The other guy might have like 5-3. He's like, well, it's only $1 more to call since you've raised 3. The other guy's already called 3. I'm calling $1 to win a pot of $6 plus my $6.50 my initial limp. So. Sorry, 150 plus 150. So 350 is I'm calling $1 to win, to see a flop where the pot's already 350. So it's going to be profitable for him to call with all his just random hands. So you're sitting there now with your pocket aces. Even if it's an overpair, you're not going to know the flop comes like, I don't know, queen 8-7. Now you're going to be like, well, what do I do now? Well, yeah, your opponents could have like a 10-9 type hand be drawing. They could already have 8-7 and have you beat with 2 pair. They could have pocket 7s and have you crushed. And you're going to sit there wondering, well, how do I put my opponents on a hand now? Because I've only raised small pre-flop, and I've given my opponents odds to call with all their different types of hands. So I'm not going to be comfortable getting all the money in now with my pocket aces, even though it's a great hand pre-flop. And now that the flop comes and it's connected well with a ton of their limp calling range, where they have odds to call with all these different sorts of hands, that it's just you're gonna have a tough time. And when I have my strong hands like pocket aces, I'm looking to build a pot and get all the money in. So I'm gonna be raising strongly pre-flop, and I'm like, ideally I'm gonna get one caller who's making a mistake by calling with his 8-7 offsuit, and then I'm gonna be playing the flop strongly, trying to get the stacks in. If my opponent's sitting there check calling the flop in turn because he's happened to hit top pair with his like 8-7 offsuit, or even like king queen offsuit. And those are your profitable situations that you want to be in with your strong hands. So I can't stress enough, don't be concerned about driving opponents out of the pot with your pocket aces type hands, because if they actually have a strong hand, or like you want to force them to make a mistake, and by only raising small or like limping or trying to be tricky and slow playing, you're only making the mistake yourself and allowing yourself to be outdrawn on the flop, and then put a lot of money in where you think you have the best hand, but being behind. So here's an interesting spot. We've got a raise under the gun from a guy. I haven't seen too much action from this guy, so I'm just going to go ahead and fold. You really want to, at the same time, as I've said, when you want to tighten up when you're out of position under the gun, at the same time, you should use the fact that if your opponents know what they're doing and you see that they've been playing kind of tight, they're also likely to be tightening up when they're under the gun. So I'd put this guy's hand range a lot narrower towards more premium type hands. So a hand like 10-8 offsuit just doesn't play well against those hands. And this is really where you get into trouble. And I can't stress this enough, but you really don't want to just be simply calling hands pre-flop, even if you're in position, because you get into trouble where you hit a flop like this with where you've hit top pair, but your opponent's now betting strong, and you really don't know what to do because, well, is he sitting on a draw, or is he sitting on pocket aces right here? And you could sit there and check call down, but your reverse implied odds are just so huge because you just never know where you're at. And yeah, it's tough to fold top pair, but you really don't know, well, where your opponent's at. So exactly what happened here, he's sitting on pocket queen. So if you're sitting on like your 10-8 there, well, you're like, oh, I got top pair, I can't fold that. Well, you really run into a ton of trouble because he's going to be betting 2 or 3 streets, and you just end up losing quite a large sum of money. So I just think it's best to fold those pre-flop against tight guys that haven't been messing around too much, and really save entering pots for when you're going to play aggressive. Save it for when you get a guy that's just limping a ton, and or even if he's raising a ton, then three bet him with those marginal hands, representing a strong hand. But when you're simply just calling against strong players who are playing a tight range, it's just not going to be profitable. And I can't stress that enough. So I think we definitely covered a lot of interesting concepts pre-flop. And I think even if you're a longtime member of OutstandingPoker.com, I think that it is definitely good to go over these again and really to shore up some of the leaks that you might have with the pre-flop play. So I hope you guys have learned a lot, and if you do have any questions about these sorts of things, I'm happy to respond to your forum posts. So if you go to OutstandingPoker.com/forum, there's also a link in the members section. Feel free to post your questions about some of the concepts we've covered either in this video today or in previous videos. So thanks for watching. This is Attitude 2 Ataros for OutstandingPoker.com.